Hey, are you one of those people who's tired of going to the poker room only to find yourself losing way too often? Or are you perhaps new to the game and now you're trying to learn Hold'em? Well, in this presentation, I'm going to present you with 8 tips that'll help you start crushing the low levels of poker almost instantaneously. Or if you want to try and move up in the levels to higher buy-ins, this video will help you as well. My name is Pierre, and I'm a professional poker player who's played for a long time. Last year, I cashed in the main event at the WSOP World Series of Poker main event in Las Vegas. I'm currently crushing tournaments of all types in many different places. And now I want to share some of what I know with you. First of all, it wasn't always that way for me. I can tell you I paid a huge and costly price to get to where I am now. I studied, I practiced, I did all the things I thought I was supposed to do, and I wasn't seeing the results at the poker table. It's only really when I found out these 8 secrets that my game turned around. And I tell you, it was almost instantaneously. Now it's time for me to share this information with you. So if you're ready, let's get started. As you can see, there are 8 tips here that'll help you. First of all, you need to know who you're playing against. What type of player and what is their playing style? Are they tight? Are they loose? Are they professional? Are they recreational? And how should you modify your playing style to deal with those types of players? This is not a game that you look inward at. This is a game where you know your competition and you manage your play in accordance with how they play. 2, where are you seated at the table? Particularly, where are you seated in relationship to the button or the dealer? This is critical for you to know what range you should play, which cards you should or shouldn't play. And we'll get into that in some degree of detail here. Number 3 is patience. Patience, patience, patience. You're going to see a lot of bad cards before you see good cards. Most new players make the mistake of playing almost anything in the hope that they're going to make a good hand. What we say is don't. Because if you do, you're simply going to be a losing player. Many tournaments last for more than 1 day. Some last for 7 days, 8 days. And most tournaments you're going to come across in casinos are at least like 8 hours before you are in the money. So take it easy. Wait for your time. 4, practice. Practice, practice, practice. And again, that has to do with going to the casino and sitting down and playing a lot of hands. When you play online, of course, you get many, many more hands per hour than you do when you're playing live. But it's important to get a lot of that experience behind you. But practicing also has to do with studying, reading, testing yourself, making sure you really understand the concepts, watching YouTube videos like this. I did, and it's what's gotten me to where I am now. 5, only play the best hands. And we're going to get into this in detail. Something that a new player is not going to like to hear. We're not going to sit there and just play any old 2 cards that seem to look good. So wait for that section to come up. What do you do in terms of raising, re-raising. How do you actually play your cards before the flop? What should you raise? What shouldn't you raise with? What should you fold? 7, how do you play after the flop? What do you do after the flop itself? What do you do on the turn and on the river? And then finally, number 8, we're going to be talking about some poker tells that'll help you, at least initially, as you get started into the game of poker. And finally, something that's not here, we're going to talk a little bit about GTO poker. It's almost, remember, new math. It's almost new poker. Huge computer simulations have been done that are able to tell you what hand should you play, how should you play it, in what situation, and so on. For a new player, I think GTO is less important, but obviously as you gain experience, it's something that you want to take a look at. So if you stick around until the end, we'll be talking about some of that. Again, please like and subscribe to the channel. It'll help us, as I'm hoping will help you. Now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, and I'm looking forward to really hearing back from you on how this stuff works for you when you go and implement it in a casino. I want to work with you, and maybe this can be the first step in that process. Let's have a conversation back and forth. Things that worked, things that didn't work, things that you'd like to hear about. Now we're going to get into detail. Okay, so first of all, who are you playing against? We categorize the player types into 4 categories. Some use 5. It's fine, but as long as you get the general idea of this. The 4 player types are the eagle. This is the person who you want to try and stay away from. This is the professional, the guy with the hoodie, the sunglasses, the headphones, the person who you can see has done millions of these hands online and who's a very strong live player. These are the guys who can come and let it rip at any point in time, and you just don't want to be involved in that unless you have something very, very good on your hand. If you have aces, if you have kings, those types of hands, you have something that you can play against these players with. But initially, as you're starting out, stay out of it. Just stay out of it, fold it, and move on to the next hand. Here's the good thing about folding a hand. That means that the stack of money that you have on hand is something that you'll have at the beginning of the next hand. And if this particular eagle player is not in it, you're a happy camper. Okay? So please take my advice on that. Obviously, as you gain experience and as you become more confident, you want to play against these players because those are the players that you're going to want to beat so that you can get to the final table in some of the major tournaments of the world. But for now, my advice is just stay away from these players. And the second player now is the loose splasher. This is the person with big arm movements who they want to play every damn hand that they can find. They want to put in big amounts and so on. And the problem with these players is that very often, not often, but sometimes they make the hand, by hook or crook. If they went in with a 7-2 offsuit and all of a sudden the board shows 2 7s or something so that they have trips, all of a sudden these players are good. And that's where they make their money. But often, these are losing players, certainly in the long term. The only way to play against these guys is simply to wait for a good hand. Now, when you have a good hand, if you have ace king, if you have 2 queens, if you have jacks, if you have something like this, that's the time when you can, effectively play against these players. And that's when you make them pay, because they're going to call you. No matter what they have, they're going to call you because they just want to see what you have. Beautiful. come and see my kings, or come and see my trip jacks that I made, and pay me. But otherwise, unless you have a very good starting hand, you're not going to play against them. That's my advice. Third type of player, that's the nit, or the person who simply sits there, makes very few arm movements, just almost you don't even know that they're at the table, and all of a sudden they're in a hand. When they're all of a sudden in a hand, they have something big. And if they're being aggressive with that hand, that they have aces. They have kings. And again, you have to look at the cards that you have in order to be able to play them. Conversely, the nit is also difficult. It's also easy to get, to fold. If they feel that they don't have the absolute nuts, they're going to fold. So if you look at what the board texture is against your hand, so for example, if there are two aces on the board and you think that this guy is sitting there with kings and you have nothing, you can bluff them and they will fold. But again, you got to know who you're playing against. And so how do you find out who they are? Well, you look at them, you find out, you study them. And if they're not in very many hands, if you have seen them turn over big hands when they are in a hand, that their playing style. And then finally, number 4, the tight aggressive player. That's what we're trying to teach you to become. Somebody who doesn't play a lot of hands, but when they do, they're aggressive, and who really knows, how to play after the flop. Those are the guys that you have to be careful about, but who you can bluff, because they are thoughtful. And if you're representing something, vis-a-vis the flop or the turn, that makes sense. If you're telling a consistent story about what your cards are, then there's an opportunity that you can get them off a hand. Or if they think you have it, simply they will fold because they're smart players. And that's what we're going to teach you to do. Okay, at this point, let's start talking about the power of position. This is something that most new players are really not that aware of. All they think about is, what cards do I have and how should I play them? What you see here is a representation of a poker table with 8 players. Sometimes you'll find 10 players at your table. Sometimes it'll be 6. Here we've simply chosen 8 to make it easy. The gray button there is the dealer button, and that's the most critical seat on the table to be aware of. And as you know, the dealer button moves every hand when a new hand is dealt. So this is a dynamic situation. Sometimes you're on the dealer button, sometimes you're in the small blind. And going around the table then, small blind, big blind, generally the small blind is 1 blind, whatever it is. It could be $1, it could be 10 cents online. And the big blind will be twice that, so 2 times or even 3 times the small blind, whether it's $3 or 30 cents or whatever it is. And then as we move out of there, we have the early positions on the table, UTG, under the gun, under the gun +1, +2, then the low jack and the high jack, and then back to the dealer button. So when a hand is dealt, the first person to make a decision about the hand is the under the gun player after the big blind. He or she is the person who's going to be saying to themselves, well, what kind of hold cards do I have? Who are the players at the table that I'm dealing with, as we just went through? And how do I generally feel about this? So at this point, having to be the first person making a decision about his or her hole cards, it's a tough thing to do because you don't know what anybody else has. It's only when you get back to the end of the deal, down by the dealer button, that more information will be available to the person who's making the decision. So it is likely that if you're under the gun, you're going to be only raising with some of the very best hands that you have or that you can think of, such as aces, kings, ace, king, queen, queen, and so on. Because you don't have any information, so you don't know. And the same thing with the under the gun plus one player. Again, very little information, so therefore stronger hands to open the betting with. And then as you get down to the dealer, like I said, now all of a sudden I know who's gone in before me and how they've acted. Sometimes you get a lot of limpers. Sometimes you have a people up front who are going to be raising, and you're going to modify your range to that information that you've already received here now. When it gets to the small blind and the big blind, way too many people who are new players don't defend their cards in that position. Now, there are places where you can access range charts and the like. All I really want you to be aware of at this point is you have to be very, very tight when you're early on, and you can open up your range as you move further down towards the end to the dealer button. And if you're in the small blind and the big blind, you need to make a consideration of what's happened before you and see if it doesn't make sense for you to still, at a minimum, call and defend your small or big blind. And that's really it for now. There's a lot more information that I can give you underneath this whole topic. But just be aware of where you're sitting, whether you should be tight, whether you can open up your range, and whether or not you should be defending. Okay, the next area I want to talk about is the area of patience. And traditionally, I think that this is probably one of the areas where new players have the biggest amount of trouble. You know, a lot of us have seen, poker on TV. You see a player like Daniel Negreanu or Phil Ivey or whoever it might be go all in with silly hands like 5-6 or unsuited, or even 7-2 unsuited and so on, and win $1 million pot. That's not poker. What we don't generally get is the whole context of why they were able to do that and why they were able to win with that hand, what kind of read they had on their opponent, and so on and so forth. So that is not poker. The first area that we like to take a look at within practice is only play your premium hands. And in a couple of slides, we're going to go through exactly which hands I want you to play and which hands I want you to fold. But it's very important to have the stamina to sit and wait for the right types of cards to play. Second area is trying not to be impulsive or to go on tilt. I've seen a lot of players, and even good players, who have a bad beat, or who may even make a mistake or whatever it is, only to completely go on tilt and start going all in and all this type of stuff. Now, that's not how you end up winning in poker. That's how you end up losing. What you do when you have a bad hand or something that goes against you, you take a deep breath, you reset your head, and you start all over again. Maybe even get up from the table, take a walk, come back, clear your head, and play the next hand using the tools that we're giving you here, and not getting angry at a particular player and wanting to show him or her. Just take a deep breath and wait. And, that's not easy. Third area, wait for the right position. And we talked about position earlier. And you can see the closer you are to the button, or, in fact, if you are on the button, the more easy it is to play the hand and the more power you have in a game of poker. So that's another area. Wait until you get closer to the button to play your hands, if you can. Fourth area is how much do you actually bet? Sometimes you'll look down at a pair of aces or a pair of kings, pair of queens, ace king, something like this. And you have a really great flop where you can see that you're clearly ahead in the hand, and many new players start betting huge amounts at that point. It's clear that we want you to be aggressive, but it's also clear that you don't want to overdo it, because what we don't want to have happen is that you start scaring away players who would otherwise have remained in the hand. So it's a very fine balancing act that you're going to have to play there. But you want to try and build the pot with some patience. Don't start getting excited too early. Also, because of this whole area of patience, it enables you to sit back or sit forward, as the case might be, but to wait and really start studying your opponents. Find out what it is their playing style might be, how they react to certain hands that they have, and really try and figure out who's who on the table. And so that's where I would be spending my time if I was sitting at that table waiting for cards, as opposed to getting off on your phone, playing a game on your phone, reading the New York Times or whatever the case is, or whatever it is that you like to do on your phone. Actually, my suggestion is put the phone away and start following the betting around the table as much as you possibly can, and learn as much as you possibly can from those players who you're playing against. Finally, overall, this is a more general comment about poker. You have to think long-term about how you manage your bankroll. There's a thing in poker called variance, which simply expresses the fact that you are going to lose some and you're going to win some. There is something called luck in poker. There are those days when a really bad loose player is going to win with 7-2 offsuit against your aces or your kings. It's just going to happen. And so you will have bad days in poker. There are going to be times when you're not going to win, even if you follow this system that I'm outlining here to a T. And that's variance. And so you're going to have to withstand some periods of time within poker where you may not be winning. However, during that time, you should still be playing. You should be gaining more and more exposure to the game. You should be learning. You should be playing hands so that you can start getting more experience. And that is going to require a certain level of bankroll. And so the ideal bankroll size is should be about 40 to 50 times your buy-in. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of money. And, obviously you won't have it in the beginning. And so you have to be prepared for swings in your poker bankroll during that time. But the idea is you need to build up a sizable bankroll. So, for example, if your local tournament at your local casino has a $140 buy-in, well, 50 times that buy-in, that's going to end up being $7,000. Same thing with your 200 buy-in in a 1-2 game, or even 300. But let's take 200 as a buy-in. Well, that's going to be 50 times 200. That's $10,000. So, and it's only when you are able to build up that type of bankroll that you'll immunize yourself to poker variance to a large extent. If you're a solid, tight, aggressive player that we're teaching you to be here. So yeah, patience is one of the key P's in poker. It's something that new players have trouble with, and it's something that I want you to really try and focus on. The biggest piece of this patience element is simply making sure you wait for the right types of cards. And so hang on in this video, because we're going to tell you exactly which cards it is that we want you to play. Well, if I was lying to you, I would tell you that you can just start playing poker and you'll be fantastic right from the beginning. I wish that was true, but it isn't. If you're going to get good at poker, you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to put in some work, unfortunately. Took me a long time to get to where I am now, and it's just been a constant development cycle for me. I think that there's three major areas that I want you to focus on. One is study, and that is reading. It is looking at videos like this one, and I do have some suggestions here for you of good people to start following. But then it's also actually going out and playing, and whether it's online or whether it's live. I almost feel that there are a number of areas where you can play for free online initially, just to get the hang of it, just to get the feeling for what it's like to sit and play with 9 other people, or how many it is that you're going to be playing with. And so I also feel that if you join some of these free tournaments that are available, eventually you'll find yourself using some of these tips that I'm providing you with here, and you're going to start making the quote-unquote fake money, or getting past the bubble. And at that point is probably when you want to try and play more live games and try and mix it up. But it's key for you to get a lot of hands played behind you. And obviously when you're doing it online, it's a lot easier and faster than if you're playing in a live game. Now, some of the people that I want you to try and look up and study, Daniel Negreanu does a lot for poker. He has his own channel. Phil Hellmuth wrote a book called Play Poker Like the Pros. That really was the book for me that changed everything. And I mean, I've read a bunch of books. I've read Super System by Doyle Bronson. I've read, Phil Gordon's Little Green Book, Harrington on poker, and Caro's Tells, and all these books. But it was really that book by Phil Hellmuth that helped me, and in particular, what helped me in that book was what he says about the player types and what he says about the hands to open with. And that's, I think, is the next slide here after this one. that we're going to go through my version of what that looks like. In addition, take a look at some of these online training areas. Upswing Poker is one. I think it's owned by Doug Polk, who's a major winning player. There is Jonathan Little, who does a lot of videos and who has a coaching site. Phil Galfond. And then in particular for newer players, Black Rain 79 Poker is a YouTube channel that speaks to you. You really ought to look it up. I love the work that he does there. So, that would be some of my suggestions, and there are more. And in fact, if you've come across some great suggestions, please put a comment below and let us know what it is, so that we can all help each other in this process. And playing online, PokerStars is the world's biggest, I think, still. But there is, in the US particularly, Club GG Poker, which is free. GG Poker is not free or available in many of the states in the US, unfortunately. But then there are poker sites like 888, there's ACR, and WSOP has their own poker site. I think WPT does as well. So there's a bunch of places where you can go download the game and just start playing for free money. And I think most of it is free, to be honest. Good experience gained that way. I started way back on PokerStars, and got hit by Black Friday way back, and it was an awful thing for the poker community. And but that's just the way it is now. Poker is slowly making its way back online in the US, at least. And for the rest of the world, I'm sure you can find great places where you can still play. I think in terms of playing live poker, you can play a home game. Again, understanding that many people who play home games don't understand how to play poker. And they're going to be of the loose category, where you're going to just have to tighten up and wait for really, really good hands. But it's certainly a way to sit and manipulate a chip stack and move the button around and just get a feel for how it all works. Otherwise, I'm sure there's a local casino not far from where you live. And then finally, Las Vegas. I remember the first time I played in Vegas, I think it was at the Venetian. I was so incredibly intimidated. I didn't know what an ante was. I didn't know, how to move my chips around and all of this. And I think it was pretty clear to the other players too that I was completely new to the game. But I worked through it, and now I know some of these little chip tricks that you can do. Shuffling the chips and all of that stuff. But it's taken a while. The fourth area here that I want to talk about is GTO poker, because there are a number of solvers and trackers that you can use to improve your poker as you practice. Lucid Poker is part of the Upswing poker site, and it's a basically computer based solver, much like the GTO Wizard, which is, I think, probably the more well-known one, where you can sit and you can put in parameters into the solver and play multiple hands. You can play against other people, and you can just simply get a lot of hands behind you, and it's really good experience. However, if you're new, I want you to sort of hold on a little bit on the whole GTO thing until you get these fundamentals down first. Okay, wake up. Wake up. Are you still with me? I'm trying to wake you up because the next slide that I show you is probably the most important slide in this whole presentation. We're going to talk about what hands you should play or what cards you should be playing before the flop. And the reason why this is so incredibly important is that playing the right cards before the flop is what puts you in a position to beat your competitors after the flop comes down, after the turn comes in, and once you get to the river as well. But without good or really good cards, especially if you're a new player and your post-flop skills are not as good as your competitors potentially, having fantastic cards at the beginning is what's going to make you succeed later on. So here we go. There are 4 areas that I want you to focus on in this section. First of all, playing pairs. I want you to play pairs from aces down to 5s. So these are ace, ace, king, king, queen, queen, jack, jack, all the way down to 5. But I don't want you to be playing 4s, 3s, and 2s. Get it? Okay. Then ace X suited. So for example, ace king of hearts, ace queen of spades, all the way down to ace 5. But they have to be suited. And the reason why they have to be suited is that if you're playing 2 suited hole cards, you have a much higher probability of making a flush in addition to whatever else it is. And also you will have, if they're connected, like for example, the ace king or even the ace 5, you have an opportunity to make a straight with the ace king, queen, jack 10, or a straight with the ace 5, 2, 3, 4. So so that's what I want you to play as well. The only unsuited cards I want you to play are the Broadway draws, so the highest straight. So these cards would be ace king, king queen, queen jack, or jack 10, and they can be offsuit simply because of the fact that they can make the best straight in poker. Other than that, other than the hands I've described to you, I want you to fold everything else. Everything else. I want you to fold a pair of 3s. I want you to fold 6-5 suited, 8-5 suited, jack 8 suited, all of these types of hands that are not within the grouping of hands I've told you about here, I want you to fold. Remember, this whole presentation is meant for poker players who are having trouble making money playing poker, and especially for new poker players. So it's not going to be like this forever. But putting you in a spot where you have a really, really good starting hand is almost 70% of the game, I feel. And most people don't understand it, or they don't do it. And so what we're describing to you here is someone who is a tight player. And tight is good. And tight is especially good if you're also an aggressive bettor. And so what we have to do now is talk about, if you play these hands, how should you be betting? Okay, so we've established the fact that you're going to be a tight player, at least here in the beginning, as you find your feet. Now we're going to talk about aggression. And what I want you to remember is that being a tight player without also being aggressive is not going to help you. So you need to be aggressive. Now, particularly in low stakes poker and also some of the lower stakes tournaments that you're going to be playing in, what you'll find that a lot of the players that you come across love to limp in. And by limping, I mean simply just playing whatever the big blind is. So if the big blind is $200, you put in another $200 yourself, and you sort of like want to sit there and wait and see what happens in the hand. And all of a sudden, you've got like 4 or 5 of the players around the table who've limped in, and the pot is now beginning to increase. So here's the first point I want you to remember. The first point is you will never limp, period. You never limp. What we just determined is how to get you a good starting hand. So pre-flop, you will never limp. You will also not change your bet sizing, because if you play the same bet size every time, people are going to have a hard time figuring out what type of hand you have. There's a lot of players out there who will play a big if they have a really good hand, and then they'll play a limp or less if they have a so-so hand. Well, that's an immediate tell. We'll talk about tells a little bit later. But what I want you to do is play the same amount every time, except one situation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And what that is going to be, if you're the first one to go in, if you're the first one after the big blind to go in, I want you to raise 2.5 times the big blind. 2.5 times. So if the big blind is 200, I want you to raise to 500. That shows the rest of the table that you have something that they should be concerned about. And it also just makes a statement that you're there to play the hand. I don't want you to give up power in any pot and let somebody else lead any pot. This is your pot. If you have kings, this is your pot. And whoever wants to play with you, well, they better have a good hand to play with you. Again, there is this consideration of where you're sitting at the table that you need to be thinking about. And of course, you're only going in with the very best when you're playing under the gun, which is the first person to act after the big blind. And you can loosen up a little bit more as you get further down towards the blind, as we discussed earlier. But in general terms, if you're the first person to open the betting after the big blind, you're going to open with 2.5 times the big blind. If the big blind is 200, you're going in with 500. If the big blind is 1,000, you're going to raise to 2,500. Now, many cases you're not the first one to act after the big blind. You'll be either in mid position or late position. And in that case, you can have these limpers who've gone in before you. So let's say you have 2 or 3 limpers who've gone in with a limp, and it's now your turn to bet your good hand, which you have. At this point, I suggest that you also consider raising. However, this is where your bet size is going to change. What I want you to do now is, if you're facing these raisers, I want you to bet 3 to 5 times the big blind, more likely 5 times the big blind. So if we're talking about 200, it's 1,000. And then I want you to add 1 big blind per limper. So if there's 3 limpers in the pot, that's 200 for each of those limpers. So now we're talking 1,600. Okay, so now what has happened is that you had the small blind, big blind. We have 3 limpers. So there's a potential for 5 people in the hand, plus yourself, which is 6 people. what you want to do is all of those people who wanted to just see what happens after the flop, we want them out. We want them out of the game. Those are the people who are sitting there with 7-4 or Jack 9 or King 2 or something like this. We don't want them to be making trips, for example, on the flop. We want them out. And if you're making it too costly for them to play, they're going to fold. They're going to fold right now. If they, on the other hand, call you, what is it that you found out? Well, you found out that they're likely to have a good hand, and you've already achieved that information, which you otherwise wouldn't have. So now you can play the flop or the turn or the river according to that knowledge that you otherwise wouldn't have had. Because if you were to limp in now, just to see, quote unquote, or even just to hide the fact that you have two kings, well, guess what? What do you know about the other players? You know absolutely nothing at this point. Okay, so I want you to raise, or I want you to re-raise 3-bet. So let's say that we had someone who raised to 2.5 blinds. Maybe they've read some things and they've heard that putting in 500 against a $200 big blind is a good thing to do in a tournament. Okay, what you do know is that you have now a player who has a hand. But you don't know how good the hand is. And there's one way that you can find out, and that is if you re-raise that player. And what I suggest you doing with the hands that I've described here, in just generally, is you re-raise. What I want you to be is aggressive. I want you to own the pot. Now, so let's say that we have a player who has put in the 500. Well, now what I want you to do is I want you to re-raise him either by doing what I said earlier on, looking at that 1600 bet, but maybe even adding a little bit to it. So putting in something at this point like 2000 will be a good bet. So maybe 4 times what he bet. And because what's going to happen is now you're going to make him think, first of all, the people behind you who wanted to limp are going to have second thoughts, because now we have one person who's raised the pot. We have one person who has re-raised the pot to 2,000 and or the bet to 2,000. Now, if they're going to start playing their hands, they better have something good. So one of 3 things can happen. Either they fold, you're happy, or they re-raise you. Well, now you need to take a look at your cards, because what are they indicating? They're indicating that they're going to have one of the top hands in poker, because that's for betting. And if the guy who raised calls your 2,000, well, now at least everybody knows that everybody has something. And again, now what we're going to do is we're going to play, sort of almost in parity by the time that the flop comes down. Let's say that you have 2 kings, and the flop comes down. With a king, you have trips. You're a happy camper, right? And if you only have 2 kings and an ace comes down, do you think it's likely that these other 2 players who are in the hand have an ace? It probably is fairly likely that they do, because they've indicated they have something very strong. So maybe they have something like ace king. They could, of course, have queens or jacks or something like this. Or they could also have some other type of ace combination. But remember now what we've been talking about so far in this presentation here. We talked about understanding who the players are at the table and how important it is that you really try and get a feel for how they play. Are they tight? Are they aggressive? And so on. We also talked about the power of position. So if you've been studying the player that you're sitting with, and you know that they're a tight player, they only play very, very few hands, but when they do, they generally show up with the goods. Well, you know they're going to have an ace in this case. Or if this is someone who you think is a good player, who was the first to act, for example, they're not going to act first without having something good generally. And so we're already beginning to understand and learn, and sort of peek behind their hold cards by being observant, by taking our time, and by understanding the dynamics of the game, and then we can act accordingly. Okay, so now let's talk about what happens after the flop comes down. The first point is I want you to play fast. So if you make a good hand, if you make trips, or if you have top pair, or if you have something, that's close to a flush or a straight or whatever, I want you to play hard. And what that means is I want you to raise right from the beginning, and especially if you're the first one to act. Generally, I want you to raise a substantial amount. I don't want you to raise a small amount, because if you're raising a small amount at this point, it's easy for someone to call you, given what's already in the pot. So whatever is in the pot, I want you to raise a minimum of half of that pot size. So let's say that there's $5,000 in the pot. It's a tournament. A minimum of 2.5 to 3,000 is what I want you to raise with. That makes a statement to your competitors about where you feel that you are in this hand, and they're going to have to take a good look at their cards before they start calling you. There's nothing wrong with having them fold at this point, because you've already made $5,000 by having them fold. So there's a good reason for you to keep the pot small. If you're betting small amounts and you're allowing other people to keep waiting to see what happens on the turn or the river, you're just allowing them to make a hand. Don't allow this to happen. You make sure that you show them that you're the leader of this hand. And by the same token, don't be afraid of rebetting if somebody has already bet a certain amount, to show them that you're serious about the hand. Because what we've taught you so far is we've taught you to tell a story. We've taught you to tell a story that says, I only play if I have something good. And if I have something good, I'm going to raise, and you're going to need to pay me. And now you're going to try and raise me off my very good hand. So I'm going to re-raise you, and it's only if you have something very, very good. Top 3 to 5% type hands that I'm going to allow you to call me. And if you do, I'm going to defend. My defenses are going to go up, and therefore I'm going to now know, okay, look, this guy has the goods, and I'm going to have to be very, very careful moving forward. So by the time you get to the river, the biggest takeaway here I want you to have is, if someone who has been with you all along this ride that we've described now, if they start betting on the river, believe them. Believe them that they have a good hand. And guess what you should do? You should fold. Because at this point, you've told a very, very strong story, and they've heard you. But if they start betting here hard on the river, you know that you're beat. So fold. This whole thing about saying, well, I just wanted to see what you had and so on. It's much, much better. Fold, and you still keep some money that you have behind, and you get to play again in the next hand. Like I've said before, a tournament takes a long time, and it's important that you allow yourself to remain in the tournament when you're beat. Now, by the same token, by the time you get to the river, it's often that newer players, when players in the hand previous to you have folded all the way up to you, they also just not folded, checked. They also allow themselves to just check. I wouldn't do that, because by that time they've showed you also that they're not 100% sure of their hand. So what I would do is I would bet again if they've checked all the way up to you. And again, one or two things can happen. Either they check, you raise, and they call you. Well, that simply means that you're getting value for your hand because you have something good. And if they fold, well, then they never had anything anyway, and you're never going to get any more money out of them anyway. So why allow yourself not to get full value? So again, let's just recap on the river. On the river, if somebody bets after going through the betting cycle that we've just described, they have a strong hand. And if you're not 100% sure of what your holding is against their hand, fold. If you get checked to all the way up to the end, after telling this type of a story, I would bet. And again, I would bet something like a third to half a pot. That'll ensure that you get enough value. Now, if they call you, it means that they're silly because you have a good hand. And if they fold, well, you would never have gotten them to pay you out anyway. But this at least gives you an opportunity to get paid for your high value hand. Okay, guys, thank you for staying with me so far. I think we've gone through the majority of the process of you becoming a tighter and more aggressive poker player. What we've talked about how important it is to understand who you're playing against, because you can almost read their hands if you know if they're very tight and passive or if they're loose and aggressive. You almost know what types of ranges they're going to be playing, and that'll allow you to modify your game accordingly. We've also taught you about the power of position at the table, how you need to be very tight if you're the first to act, how it's important to understand that you can loosen up a little bit more towards the button. We've taught you about the cards that I want you to play, and everything else, seriously, I want you to drop here the first couple of months moving forward. And then finally, we've taught you about what to do in terms of your betting pre-flop and after the flop. And what we said there was that we wanted you to be aggressive and take control as the leader of the hand. That in its simplicity is it. As we come to the conclusion of this, let's just talk about a couple of more things. One is tells, and the other one will be just a few thoughts about GTO poker and the new poker that's going on. So a couple of tells that you might have fun with as you try and observe the people around the table are two whole card kind of tells that I think are fun to watch. The first one is how long someone looks at their whole cards. Generally, if they look at their hole cards for just a short period of time, what that means is that they quickly make a determination and say, wow, this is a good hand. If they decide to play it. If they decide to throw it away, obviously that's a given. But if it's only a short peek at these hole cards and they're going to play the hand, it's almost like an, oops, I got a good hand here. I don't want anybody to know it. And that's what they're subconsciously telling themselves. So, short look, betting, this guy is very likely to have a good hand, a very good hand. Now, conversely, if they take a long time to look at their hole cards and they decide to play the hand, what they're telling you here is most often that I have a pair of cards here that I don't really know what to do with. And let me think about it some more. Let me look again. What is the best way that I can bluff my way through this hand? So try and first test this with the players that you're observing and see if it isn't true. And then once you know this information about a player, well, then you can start acting accordingly when you play in a hand with them. Okay, the second one is what I would call the furtive hole card check when the board is flushing. So you see three flushing cards, or even just two flushing cards on the flop, or maybe also on the turn, and then a quick check of someone's hole cards. What are they really doing here? What they're doing is they're trying to say, I wonder, did I have that suit on my hand? They may even have a very good hand, but what they're looking to do is to say, I wonder if I had hearts or spades, as the case may be. And what they're also telling you by doing that is they're telling you that they didn't have two cards of that suit. Because I can almost guarantee you, if they had two spades or two hearts, which is flushing with the table, they wouldn't need to check. They would have remembered that. Generally, when you first check your hole cards, you know if you have two spades or two hearts. But if you don't have two of them, sometimes you can't remember if you actually had one of them. So what that check does is it tells you that, okay, this guy is not sure if they actually have a heart. And if they're going to try and represent now a flush, they're lying. So again, I want you to check it before you act on it. But if this is something that the guy shows you, you know what they're sitting with, and it's not a flush. The third point on poker tells is simply this. If they act strong, they are generally weak. And if they act weak, they're generally strong. Now, how do you act strong? You act strong by splashing your chips, for example, when you're betting. Or you act strong by a confrontational eye stare. I'm going to look at you like this. Basically, what it means is that the guy is weak. And, by the same token, when they're sort of sitting back, trying to look unobtrusive, as if they don't know what they're doing, and so on and so forth, generally they have something good. There are books written about poker tells, and there's so much more to talk about in this section. But again, play with this a little bit as you gain some confidence in studying the players. And we can always have a video about poker tells on its own at some point in time. And again, I want you to please, in the comments below, suggest some topics that you'd like to hear about more. And I'll try and see if we can put something together to help you with that. Okay, so finally, we've gotten to the promised area I was going to talk about, which is GTO poker. GTO poker stands for Game Theory Optimal Poker. And essentially, it's the new age, you can say, of poker. There are a lot of players out there who don't know anything about this and who don't want to know anything about it because it simply just sounds too complicated. But basically, what it was computers and AI have conducted millions and millions of simulations about every different hand combination, stack size, table position, and all of these things, and thrown it into a big bucket and produced range charts and suggested ways to play in almost any given situation. And so GTO is something that takes a long time to study. It's worthwhile understanding at least the concepts of it, not understanding all the details, because I don't think any human can really ever get to the amount of detail that these computers did. But it is something that's very worthwhile to pursue, and it's something that I am personally studying as much as I can. However, it is not something that I think you should be looking into detail at this point. Simple reason is that I think there's a couple problems with it too. I think at the end of the day, poker is a game that's played by people and not by computers. And unless you're playing against people who all have the same amount of knowledge about what you should theoretically do in poker, well, guess what? You're going to get a solution that's different than the one that the computer is suggesting. Now, that having been said, there's a lot of people who've made a lot of money following the prescriptions generated through GTO, so it's certainly worthwhile. I would much rather suggest that you spend your time really focusing on what we've told you about here in this program. And once you get more and more comfortable with this, in maybe 6 months' time to a year, then start to delve into the whole GTO concept. And I think you'll get a lot of value from it, as I have as well. So thank you. This is it for now. Welcome to poker if you're new, and I hope you can use this if you are someone who wants to rehabilitate your poker to some extent. Really follow this process I've outlined, learn the process, and then start deviating from the process. If you've liked it, please subscribe, please like it, and please comment in the comments below. Give me any suggestions that you have, or make comments about what you've seen, and let's see if we can't meet again soon. I will certainly pay attention to the subjects that you're wanting me to delve into. And also just send me a message if you want to discuss something else about poker. I'm here. I respond to all the messages. And thanks for watching, and good luck in poker.